Okay, we're now on to the last session for today's broadcast, and it's a biggie: uniting business and consumers to create exponential impact for the planet. It's a topic that's been a thread over a number of the sessions today. So on your screens now, you see the panel is ready to go. We have Jorn Lambert, the Chief Digital Officer, at Mastercard; Sanjayan, the CEO of Conservation International; Matthias Wikström, the CEO and co-founder of Doconomy; and Meaghan Parker, the Executive Director of Society of Environmental Journalists. It's a 45-minute discussion, and as you have been doing throughout today, it's an opportunity for you to get your questions answered. So do use the Q&A box to the side of the live stream. But now it's my pleasure to hand over the virtual stage to you, Meaghan.
Thank you very much, Liam. As Liam said, I'm Meaghan Parker, the Executive Director of the Society of Environmental Journalists. And for those of you who don't know, the Society is the largest North American membership association of professional journalists covering energy and the environment. We currently have about 1,600 members in 43 countries. The majority of them are in the US and Canada. And our mission is to increase and improve environmental journalism by building the capacity of the reporters who tell the world's most important stories. So I'm extremely pleased to be here today for this important story about partnerships between the private sector and other organizations and consumers in order to make change in our environment. I want to dive right in so we can learn more about this topic. Jorn, could you tell us what is the Priceless Planet Coalition and what is your vision for forming it?
Yeah, thank you, Meaghan, and delighted to be here with all of you. So look, Priceless Planet Coalition is a coalition of like-minded companies, so far mainly banks, merchants, but also cities and transportation agencies that want to unite their efforts in climate action. And it really stems from a couple of insights that we had over the past kind of 18 months that brought us all together. The first insight is that actually, climate is a huge topic with all of these companies and of their customers or their consumers, and all of these partners want to do something about climate that goes beyond reducing emissions, which anyway we all have to do, and reducing our own footprint. And there's essentially four realizations that we got to. The first one is, gee, we're all doing things in a fairly fragmented way. If we can bundle our efforts, we get strength in numbers, and we can really make an impact way beyond every individual company. Is number one. Secondly, we want to make sure that we embed sustainability in the fabric of our business. If sustainability is the job of an ESG unit in a company, and it's a ESG project, you actually will lose longevity over time, and you will not be able to gain scale. And so by embedding it in the very fabric of the business, you actually make sure it's perennial, it stays, and you can scale. And for us, obviously, that's in payments. The third point is that we want to enlist consumers in this effort, not just make it a corporate piece, but actually educate consumers on the impact of their own footprint. And that's where the work that we're doing with Matthias's company is so crucial. We want to encourage them to do things, and we want to empower them to actually contribute themselves. We reach potentially 3 billion consumers. We can make it easy and safe to make small donations, and so enlisting consumers can give immense scale, but encouraging consumers to change their behaviors is ultimately what we all want to do. And then the last point is where Sanjayan comes in. We want to turn these efforts into nature-based solutions. We want to actually plant trees. And that is for two very simple reasons. Firstly, it's a very effective way to reduce global warming and to affect climate change. But also it's one that is very relatable, very easy to convey to consumers who we want to enlist. And so if you plant a tree, people can visualize the tree. Everybody loves trees. And that's where we have Sanjayan to help us. So our vision is within 5 years to plant 100 million trees. We now have 40 companies who joined our coalition. some smaller ones, some very large ones like an HSBC or an IKU. And so we're well on the way to realize that.
Great. Thank you very much for laying that out. Sanjayan, I'll turn to you next. Tell us how Conservation International got involved and what you see are the benefits of partnering on this project.
Sure, Meaghan, and good to be here. And thanks, Jorn, for that intro as well. You know, this has been a remarkable and challenging and tragic and catastrophic year in many regards. The beginning of this year, my first trip outside of the United States was actually to Australia. And I was there looking at the fire and the impact of the fire damage on Australian ecosystems and on people's lives. It really seems like a distant memory today. Remember how much those Australian fires dominated the headlines. But since then, we've had, you know, catastrophic pandemic, which, like all pandemics, came from the destruction of nature. We've had multiple storms and hurricanes hitting different places around the world, from the Philippines to another hurricane making landfall in the United States. This one called Zeta, because we've run out of letters in the alphabet. We've got catastrophic fires in the Amazon, as well as in California and the Pacific Northwest. And nothing about this year was normal. If you ever needed a moment to remind yourselves about the importance of nature in keeping us safe, in protecting our lives, and in giving us that spiritual sustenance that we all need, all you have to do is look around, right? All you have to do is look around. The biggest challenge that we face, and in a very existential way, is climate change. And I think you know, everyone understands and recognizes this. It turns out the science shows that in order for us to get to the targets that were set, for example, in the Paris Climate Agreement, or any reasonable target that one might set for climate and for keeping our planet safe, we have to end the destruction of nature, particularly forests, tropical forests, but also boreal forests, peatlands, mangroves, etc. It turns out that about 30% of the carbon capture and storage that we need to get to meet Paris can come from the protection of nature. So the science on this is very good, and the return on investment is also quite high. So, you know, it's the only technology that we have today at scale, virtually anywhere on the planet, that we can immediately bring into use in order to draw carbon out of the atmosphere and hold it, which is trees, right? Trees. So that science is very clear. It's now pretty much accepted by all the companies and by most governments around the world as well. Now, how do you actually do that? There's three ways to do it. You can protect standing forests. We got to do that for sure. You can improve the management of nature and protected forests. For sure, we could do that. And then the third is restoration, restoring, putting back what we had taken in the past and doing it faster and at a scale that we hadn't imagined before. That's the place that you can get the largest leap in capture, but we also are only taking baby steps today. So we have these very ambitious goals for restoration. The World Economic Forum, for example, in February, laid out a 1 trillion tree campaign, you know, basically come back, you know, replant 1 trillion trees. The African Union has embraced this goal about restoring, you know, quite literally hundreds of thousands of hectares in Africa. The United Nations has got behind this goal, but there's very little action, very specific action behind it. And that's where this Price-led Planet Coalition and the work that Conservation International and another core partner, World Resources Institute, plays in helping to identify, direct that funding so that we can achieve specific targets on the ground in real geographies like Australia, like Kenya, like Brazil. And I wouldn't just say replanting trees. I would say regrowing forests. That's actually what we want to do, regrow forests. And with 100 million as a target in 5 years, it's quite ambitious. And there's no need to stop at 100 million. We can continue to grow, and that is the hope of doing this. But I think what we are working on right now with Mastercard and with WRI and lots of other partners as well is finding a really wonderful and powerful mechanism to stimulate individual action, consumer action, all of us, all of you out there, in a joint, ambitious earth shot or moonshot, if you will, to regrow forests, particularly tropical forests, at scale.
Thank you for explaining that. We'll talk more about scale in a minute too. Matthias, explain to us how the consumer piece of this partnership works.
Sure, Meaghan. I just wanted to listen more to Sanjayan and this grand ambition, because it really resonates at core with what we do, and especially engaging consumers. We believe that there is a underserved function in the market where consumers have a hard time connecting every action with a reaction. It has not yet until now been substantiated by data. It has not until now been tangible enough. So through this amazing opportunity working with Mastercard and a company that is extremely credible in their space, making use of the credit card, which is an amazing tool for consumption, but also a fantastic textbook for educating consumers around their impact through their lifestyle choices manifested in consumption. We see a fantastic opportunity in engaging those that are simply sick of synthetic talk around change, big words about positive effects that are not tangible, loud words around numbers that you can't relate to. So that's why we are super happy to join this Alliance of the Willing, engaging a lot of companies from a lot of different businesses. Because if there's something we have learned around the importance and the abilities of educating consumers around the world, is that most people want to do good. Most people want to be part of the solution. Most people just need to understand, when am I not? So in order to do so, collaborations like this is a textbook example for how real change can be created, tangible change can be created. And in order for that to be sustainable, in order for that to be long-lasting, it needs to be understood, because what is understood engages. And once you're engaged, the insight is an obvious effect of that. And with the insight, you can obviously choose, like Jean-Paul Sartre said, once you know and are aware, you can choose to do something, or you can choose to do nothing, but you're still aware. And I think that awareness point is at the very core of our contribution to this alliance. I'm very proud to be part of this initiative out of Doconomy perspective.
Thank you for that. Now, as I said, I want to dig more into the idea of scale. One of the biggest challenges in climate change is, of course, its scale and the scale of responses that are needed and that are being proposed. What are the unique elements of this approach that really support impact at scale? And how will you compare and measure that to other efforts, or position yourselves in relation to other efforts that are operating at scale? And I'll open it up to all of you to answer.
Maybe I'll start. So I'll start by saying we're not comparing us or competing with other initiatives. I mean, it's great that there's other initiatives, and the more the merrier, I would say. And hopefully many of them scale, right? So that's I want to put this to the side. This is not ours is better than others. There's many good initiatives. I think the way that we think about scale is, obviously, if you have many large companies, and in our space that's financial institutions and merchants and what have you, building towards a similar goal and combine their efforts, you'll actually achieve much more than each individually trying to do their things in their corner with all the overhead that it takes, because this is not easy. I mean, everybody can plant a tree in the back garden, but doing in a way, to Sanjayan's points, that it has maximum effect, regrowing forest in the right places with the right species in a social context that is sustainable. We need to make sure that these trees are still there in 100 years, that they don't destroy ecosystems or don't destroy communities. That is actually really hard, and so we spend a lot of time on making that right, because we could do as much damage as we can do good if we don't use science and use the right partners for that. But I think what's really unique here and interesting is that many of the partners that we have very different strategies and priorities in their business. And we're actually allowing them to execute their own priorities and ambitions within the context of this program. And so if a bank says, oh, I want to provide my consumers with the carbon footprint of their spending through the solution that Mathias presented, great, they can do that, and they can gamify that, a little bit like your Fitbit watch gamifies that, and lots of engagement that you can do that. If another bank says, man, I am fed up of sending credit card statements over the mail and using lots of paper, I want to convert consumers to electronic statements, and I'll plant a tree for every consumer that changes, they can do that, right? So we're not defining how they engage consumers. They do that ideally in a way that supports their own marketing or their own business ambitions, but all that funnels towards the same project that then Conservation International or WRI are executing against. We are not also the ones who are, I mean, we're leaving that really to Sanjayan and to WRI to decide where those trees goes. I know nothing about trees, and you know, you don't want to trust me with that. We want to leave that to the experts. And so by putting these pieces together, I think we can make these funds work as hard as possible, but also make sure that we bundle things and gain that scale. Hence why we believe that 100 million is both ambitious and possible. And Sanjayan, trust me, we won't stop there. That's just the first foray into that space.
Well, let me just quickly add to that. So you've done such a great job, Jorn, of talking about the science behind this. Let me put on your hat a little bit as a consumer and someone thinking about the digital market space. I think that even just the branding around this Priceless Planet Coalition. I mean, what a fantastic term! What an absolutely eye-catching description this is. You know, one of the things that we in science and conservation have had is we've had a really hard time explaining what we do. And we've had a hard time, especially with these more complicated things. It's not as simple as like, we're going to save elephants and let's focus on that, even though that's not simple to do by any means. You know, when you talk about climate change, when you talk about natural climate solutions, when you talk about using nature as your primary tool for combating some of the worst effects of climate change, you know, that it gets pretty esoteric. And by reducing this to a wonderfully crisp idea of a priceless planet and a way in which every one of us who, you know, partners with one of these companies or, you know, carries a Mastercard, frankly, you know, has a way of then contributing to something, I think is really good. We've not managed, you know, the recent poll was done on climate change. It's really interesting. The New York Times, I think, did this poll, showed that people were, you know, the inclination for people to support work around climate was even higher than the inclination of folks to support work around dealing with the pandemic. And one of the things we've noticed that even though this year has been disastrous for so many businesses, many of the best businesses have stayed the course, and in some cases actually accelerated their work on climate, because they know that this is out there and they're going to deal with it. So I'm very pleased that I think we can achieve scale, not only because we will restore forests in the right way in the right places. We have the science to do that, but also because we have this incredibly smart way of engaging people in trying to protect our priceless planet.
Mathias, anything to add to that? Or
Yeah, definitely. I can only build on what Sanjayan are saying about the priceless planet, because I think, to me, this is a lot about language. And Meaghan, out of your perspective, I think as a journalist, language is one of the most critical resources in driving positive change, in enabling a more sustainable and resilient tomorrow. So I think out of that perspective, language is extremely important. And what we're trying to do to scale this from a Doconomy perspective is to give the planet, or the climate, if you will, a voice in every transaction by scoring every purchase out of a CO2 impact perspective, and enabling any bank to do the same, to engage their users in turn, to educate them around their impact. Because equally as much as language is critical when it comes to this situation, education is as well. I think we need to educate people not as much around, in order to scale, not as much around what they need to stop doing, but what they need to start doing. And I think the most critical thing that they need to start doing is to understand their impact. And if I go to myself, I'm average, smart, and quite lazy. So when we develop our services, if it works with me, it probably works with a lot of other people as well. And I think that you need to connect this positive change to something that you do every day, that you have great respect for, and that means a lot in your life. We connected it to your spending. And I think if we can give the climate a voice that accelerates in the equal terms of the spending behavior of consumers across the world, we could have posters saying "consumers to the rescue," because that's exactly how this could potentially scale. If consumers understand their impact, they will probably act in a more mindful way. And if they act in a more mindful way, planting more trees is likely to be one effect. Not having to plant equally as many trees is potentially another over time. And I think that's also something that we are hoping to contribute to. Right now, out of a scaling perspective, Doconomy has a learning curve that is going straight up. And I'm just happy to be able to connect in situations like this, because I think collaboration is at the core of success, the success factor of projects like this. And I think Jorn and his team has proved that already by connecting expertise like Sanjayan and others to the great abilities of large corporations, of change makers within every company that has been waiting for an opportunity like this to step up, to contribute, and to show the way. I think in many ways, Price's Planet Coalition has put a flag on the moon. Admittedly, I mean, we're talking about our other planet Earth, but put a flag on the moon saying, guys, this can be done. We can do this together, and there is numbers to prove that. So I think scalability is at
concerns in addressing a complex problem like climate change is the potential for unintended negative consequences. How are you guys working together to avoid or mitigate or even just identify those before they start?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and actually, one of the things that we ourselves asked ourselves as we started this, and one of the things that we need to address with every single partner is, should we even do that? Because we'll be accused of greenwashing, or we'll have the skeptics out there who will be critical, and this might backfire. Should we rather do nothing? Which is like the worst possible outcome. I know that people who criticize companies' efforts mean well and want to hold our feet to the fire, want to make sure that we hold up the highest standards. But the effect cannot be that we do nothing, right? And so we said, look, we're not going to do nothing. We are going to proceed, but we're going to make sure that we leave to the experts what the experts need to do, and we leave to us what we do best, which is to, manage the money, make sure that we can source the money. And so we have worked with CI and WRI as the experts to deal with that piece. And I'll hand over to Sanjayan to kind of say how they do that. And we've also appointed a climate advisory committee, a number of very prominent climate experts to actually advise us on how to proceed, and where to plan, how to approach it. Because again, that's not what we do best. We need to leave to the experts of that. That doesn't mean that everybody will give us a pass. We will still come under scrutiny, and we should. And we should actually be able to withstand scrutiny, because it is important that we do the right thing. It is important that we think about unintended consequences. But we've tried to address it as best as we could. And I think one of the reasons why we have so many partners flocking at us is because they wrestle with the same things. They want to contribute. They're a little bit nervous about what could come at them, and actually by let's say assessing, auditing our processes, we've gotten them comfortable with where we are. But again, we should be humble. We should be very, very careful with this, because it's important to do the right thing and not to get sidetracked on that. And Sanjayan, would you mind kind of just illustrating a little bit kind of how we avoid the pitfalls, or what pitfalls to avoid, and how we make sure that we do the right thing here? You're on mute, though.
Sorry, let me just step back for 1 second. And so I do appreciate the deep skepticism that consumers and the general public have. You see this now, it's election season in this country and around the world, and you see the fever pitch of worry about disinformation, right? And it seeps into everything. I think 10 years ago, the skepticism was very warranted when it comes to big companies making commitments. Today, I have to say, I am not seeing major brands making commitments that they do not genuinely intend to keep. These commitments are coming from the CEOs, they're coming from the board, they're not just coming from the sustainability office. They go far beyond what a consumer might expect. And they're being made in a way that is not beyond the lifetime of the management team or the CEO himself or herself, right? So that's what's interesting. It's not like a commitment that you or the partners are making in 2060 or 2080, or like who cares by then, right? This is 5 years. You're making a long-term commitment, but you're breaking it up into very, very manageable chunks. So that notion of greenwashing, at least for the major brands, I don't see that there. I think, from your CEO, Ajay Banga, to, the CEOs of major companies around the world, Doug McMillan at Walmart, or, David Taylor at P&G and others like that. I think these commitments around the environment and climate are strong and are real, but doesn't mean that the work is easy. And that's where I think we can get it, I wouldn't say totally wrong, but we might not maximize the effectiveness that we could potentially have if we're smart about it. So what you plant, how you allow for natural regeneration, where you plant it, how you involve communities in benefiting from those restoration projects, how you provide multiple benefits in terms of biodiversity, water, and carbon, all play into our factors about where we choose to work. So 3 of the opening projects with sort of this coalition, Priceless Planet Coalition for CI and WRI and Mastercard, are focused on in Australia, restoration, particularly after the fires, in Kenya, and in Brazil. And those geographies are chosen very specifically because the expertise is there, the capacity is there in country in order to do it at the scale of, say, 1 million or 2 million or more trees. I think that as we get more familiar with it, we're going to be willing to take on, let's say, more risky geographies where the capacity or the technology for doing restoration, natural restoration that involves communities and that uses native species still needs to be developed.
Great, thank you so much for answering that tough but important question. And now we've got a lot of great questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to try to get to as many of those as we can in the remaining 15 minutes that we have. First, a really important question. What are your targets? Do you have concrete, you mentioned some numbers to date, but do you have a set of concrete targets? Is there a place where people can access those? And how often will you be reporting against those targets?
Yeah, so I invite you, everybody, to kind of go on the site, pricesplanet.org. And actually, I also invite people to go to prices.com/pricesplanet. I'll come back to that in a second. So on pricesplanet.org, you will see our initial projects that we're launching. Sanjayan mentioned Kenya, Australia, and Brazil. Each of the projects has the capacity that we can take, and how many trees. We'll actually have the specific species of trees, all the details. And we will continue to add projects as the coalition grows, as the funding grows, as we're hopefully exhausting the 2.5 million trees in Brazil, so we can move to Madagascar or to Portugal or wherever the experts tell us that it makes sense, right? So the objective over 5 years is 100 million trees, but we'll have points on the board. We'll have reporting as soon as probably next month, where our first roots go into the ground. People will be able to follow it, and will be able to see where exactly it happens, how it's going, and how the forest is growing as such. I wanted to point you to Prices Planet, because also, for example, right now, today, we're doing an auction in the US whereby people can bid for specific assets, and that auction, the proceeds of that auction all go to trees. And for example, if you're into Star Wars, you can bid for a Han Solo parka signed by Harrison Ford. If you're into nature holidays, you can bid for a stay at Yosemite Park or in Lake Powell. So go onto that site and bid, because your bid will go straight to the trees. And so lots of that kind of stuff will be happening throughout the year in order to feed the funnel and to get people enthusiastic about this.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers the question about targets, and to check out the details online. Another question that came in is, what sustainability frameworks do you find most valuable for helping to guide this initiative? And I would add, especially as you expand it, what of the frameworks out there are you basing your approach on?
Well, so Mastercard itself has its own corporate frameworks, right? Like SBTI and RE100. I suppose that's what we're talking about. I think in terms of the tree planting projects, they're all verified and in line with all the planting standards. But again, let's kind of have the expert talk about that to make sure that we're. Lots of standards out there, but I think we are applying what is the right practices.
All I would add to that is that in all the countries that we're working in, one of the advantages that we have is that we have either folks with their feet in the mud, like on the ground teams, or partners with on the ground teams. So we are going to use the frameworks that make sense for the local context, but always adhering to the best restoration standards for restoration ecology and natural regeneration. We're always aiming to lower the cost of tropical restoration, which is very expensive right now, and create the longest lasting and fastest tree growth using a mix of native species to maximize carbon, to maximize biodiversity, and to maximize benefits to local communities. In every place we work with free, informed, and prior consent of local communities or indigenous peoples. They're always included into those projects. For example, in the Brazilian Amazon restoration work we do, it's almost exclusively with indigenous communities in many of the places we work in. So the restoration ecologists on the ground are setting those standards, but as an organization as a whole, we hold ourselves to very high standards when we report on carbon and when we certainly work with local communities and indigenous peoples.
Matthias, do you want to jump in on that one, or?
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's interesting. It's a very interesting question, but I think it skips one level, and it's the framework relevance to the man on the street, because I think this is part of the problem. It's a language that distances experts from the daily life of everyday climate action. So I would say that this is not something that you're a requirement. This is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to dialogue with people that are concerned. People are worried in their everyday life around, what's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my grandkids? There's a fire next door. There's a hurricane coming the other direction. What's going on? So we need to be able to pick up on this dialogue and realize we don't have all the answers, but we need to dare to ask all the questions, and without feeling stupid about asking them. And I think many times the language of sustainability expertise, and we have great respect for working both with academia and with science. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that sometimes you need to translate this into something that resonates when I sit and have dinner with my mother, in order for it to engage. If it becomes too academic, or if it becomes too synthetic, it just won't resonate, and it won't change behavior, and it won't drive the understanding that I think is the most important when it comes to educating our children. I mean, looking at what's ahead of us, I think we need to pretty much educate the consumers of tomorrow to avoid accelerating the climate crisis of today. And they're coming back to it again. I think language is a very important factor. So there is brilliant frameworks out there, but none of them are self-explanatory, I would say.
And just to chime in, I do think it's a very profound point, right? So in many of these conferences, you have experts talking to themselves. And they kind of wallow in their expertise, and they get really, really excited about that. And there's 7.5 billion people that are who matters in this, right? So I think Matthias makes a great point. We really need to bring it to everybody, because everybody can contribute and wants to contribute.
Yeah, as an editor, I always called that the mother test. I'd read something and say, would my mother understand it? So I've been a lot of journalists use similar, frameworks for comprehension. And that goes
and
to another...
and Meaghan, I think that's almost the unique prospect that this coalition provides, because it's not simply about having money to do the work, even though that is crucially important. It's not simply about knowing the science or having the place on the ground to get the work done, but it's the prospect of engaging with these vast numbers of partners, and then through them, consumers, you and I. That's where the excitement about what this could actually build to really comes. Because as far as I can tell, I don't know of a similar kind of groundswell approach to engaging so many people in so many sectors to work towards climate change through reforestation.
Great. Another potentially tough question. A couple people have asked about political environment in which you would be working, and a political polarization more generally, but of course specifically in places like Brazil. How do you what are your concerns about that, or how do you plan to mitigate that, or is it not a problem?
So firstly, go ahead, Sanjayan.
Oh, no. So look, the thing about Conservation International is that we have worked, and we continue to work in some extraordinarily challenging environments. We started our work in Liberia during the midst of the civil war there, and we've continued to work in Liberia for 2 decades, and I would say successfully so. So we're an organization that has the resources and the resilience to be able to work in challenging places. Obviously, the political climate can make a big difference. But for example, in Brazil, the interesting thing is that the governors in certain states that we work in, Amazonas is a good example of it, as well as the indigenous communities that we work in who stored vast amounts of this land, have been and continue to be incredibly receptive to the work that we do. So yes, you have to sometimes take into impact, you have to factor in shifting politics, not just in places around the world, but also in Europe and certainly in the United States. But I am actually, the big signal that happened when, the big signal that I've been most surprised about in the last 4 years, certainly in this country, but also around the world, is despite what national governments have said about climate change, consumers, the average public, and very importantly, companies have stayed in because they are mostly based on science, that they're data-driven, and they're in it for the long run. They are in it for far beyond a single election cycle.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? So election cycles are relatively brief, but people have longer memories. I was really struck this year as we were working towards the coalition. This is the year where every executive in every company has an excuse to do nothing. We have a pandemic on our hands, for God's sake.
Yes.
Lambert, what are you doing here with your? But I didn't get that response. I didn't get that excuse. People actually said, yeah, that is top of the agenda, including in countries like Brazil, in countries where the political climate is perhaps not as propitious. People really worry and want to lean in and see the long game that we need to be played, not the short game that certain countries are in.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end here, and I wanted to ask one final question. How can companies get involved, and what other ways can you are you looking to expand this initiative?
Well, so if they want to get involved in Priceless Planet, go on that website and express interest. Hopefully, we'll have many. But if not that, take perhaps some inspiration of the model that we're putting out. Again, this is not a competition. The more the merrier. And if you have similar initiatives in other sectors or in other places in the world, by all means. I think hopefully it's an inspiration for everybody, and hopefully you can contribute. All right.
Any final thoughts, Sanjayan?
No, I think that just explained it very well. I'm really excited about this. I think it's just you wait for those moments in time when you have a perfect opportunity to engage large numbers of people in what, for the most of my life, has felt like a hobby or a niche, and now it's a way of life. Climate change is not knocking at our door; it's inside the house now. And if you live in California, if you live in the Gulf Coast of the United States, if you live in Colorado, if you really anywhere on the planet, you are feeling it today. You're feeling it now. You know someone who's impacted by it. And this gives you a chance to start fighting back.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Matthias, if you have any final words you want to throw out?
No, sure. I think it's obvious that, and Mastercard is showing a lot of people how it can be done, that if we can get the efficiencies of stakeholders in the financial system to cater for the needs of the fragilities of the ecosystem, I think we will be in a good place.
Thank you all. This has been extremely informative, and I can tell from the questions that our attendees enjoyed it, and I look forward to following the initiative.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meaghan. Thank you, Jorn. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mathias. Bye-bye.
Thank you all, guys. What a great discussion. Very enlightening, and yes, very popular. A lot of questions coming through. But take care, guys, and look forward to speaking to you soon. And yes, what a brilliant way to end today's discussions. And it's flown by for me, and I'm sure there's a lot of interesting insights and ideas for you to take from it. If you missed any of today's sessions, then don't worry, they're already being uploaded to our on-demand hub now, so do keep checking back later today. And do join us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern time for another day of very interesting discussions and case studies and Q&As with senior executives from the likes of PayPal, VF Corp, Apple, NHL, Ben & Jerry's, DSM North America, to name just but a few, as well as an exclusive interview with the President of Colombia. Well worth a listen. That's it all from me and the team for today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the excellent questions. I hope you enjoyed the discussions. I hope you have a lovely day ahead of you, and see you tomorrow. Stay safe.